Happy to see some familiar names here. Thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to have you. We're going to have an action-packed webinar. We're going to have to move a little bit quickly. Very cool. So we are recording this webinar. It'll be uploaded to our website, which we'll share about in a moment. And it is also being live streamed on Facebook, just so you're aware. And we're going to get started. So welcome everyone to this webinar on Alaska's renewable energy future. We're so glad that you've joined us to learn more about the benefits of accelerating Alaska's transition to clean renewable energy. Shivaik Isench Ijich u Ruth Miller Gushtanish Iji, then Inakanaga Sheskun Kanash Chiyangas Lenish Ite, Eko Kaslenchugusakayaki Landa to Dekayakak Shugu Yestuda, to Kijne Vana Shakayaki Landa. Shidaznaka Heather Kendall Miller Shumkda, to Uid Miller Stukda, to Chickenek Yetel Hanod Bagud Yachliat Sette. My English name is Ruth Miller. My Deni'ina Athabascan name is Shivaik Isen, and my family is from the Lake Clark area, though I was raised here on our Deni'ina homelands of Dekayakak in Anchorage as traditional meeting grounds. I presenced my family here and my ancestors here. It's very exciting to be a part of this movement towards recreating Alaska in the image of the reciprocity, respect, and sustainability that our ancestral stewards seeded here millennia ago. I presently serve as the Climate Justice Director for Native Movement and also as a Deni'ina steward of Anchorage lands. I'm so honored to humbly thank the Akutna tribe for letting us be here, where many of us are calling in from, and to recognize the Deni'ina and Atna stewards that have shepherded us as a community towards right relationship, have always protected and cared for these lands and waters that surround us, and with whom, we are all renewing our commitment to be in better relationship and better allyship with as we move forward in this work. It is imperative to acknowledge the cultural beauty and the determined commitment of Indigenous peoples to seed this work towards sustainability and justice, and to renew our commitment to continuing their preservation, to protect their health and wealth for generations to come. So in this webinar, we're going to look at some very clear and distinct ways to do that. We're going to look at some of the key findings in a recently released report sponsored by the Alaska Climate Alliance's Regenerative Economies Working Group that details the benefits of accelerating Alaska's transition to renewable energy, including creating thousands of new good jobs and making energy more affordable for Alaskans. And then we will hear from a distinguished panel of local experts who will be discussing various renewable initiatives across our state and key strategies for accomplishing the transition to renewable energy. We'll also take a look at some upcoming action opportunities and ways to get involved with our Collaborative Economic Vision Coalition. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge our co-hosts for this webinar, REAP, the Renewable Energy Alaska Project, Alaska Solar Energy Industry Association, Arctic Solar Ventures, Native Movement, Pacific Environment, Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, 1547, Juneau Hydropower, Alaska Public Interest Research Group, Native Peoples Action, AKV3, and 60 Hertz. And before we get started with this program, there are just a few logistics we'd like to name. We ask that you please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, organization if you'd like to share, pronouns if you'd like to share, and please name the Indigenous lands that you're calling in from. We will be watching the chat for questions, but specifically, we would invite you to target your questions to Carly Weir, who will be collecting them for Kay to later moderate. And similarly, for those who joined us in our last webinar, we maintain a respectful and safe environment here online, and we'll be doing everything that we can to ensure that that is upheld. So we're happy to have this chat open to speak and interact with all of you, and we really turn towards our supportive and beautiful community founded on love to help protect one another. This webinar again is being recorded and will be posted after the event on our website, aknexteconomy.com, where you can also find our report, Alaska's Renewable Energy Future, New Jobs, Affordable Energy. So to tell us more about that report, I'm very excited to introduce Kay Brown. Kay is the Arctic Policy Director for Pacific Environment, and she is one of the principal authors of this report. Kay is a former state legislator and former Director of Oil and Gas for the state of Alaska, and she's going to present some highlights.
Thank you, Ruth, and hello, everyone. Clean, affordable energy is good for Alaskans, for our economy, our pocketbooks, our health, and the planet. And one of the best ways to get those benefits is to accelerate our transition to renewable energy. Alaska can benefit by increasing investments now in the clean energy revolution. We can create thousands of jobs, reduce the cost of energy, improve health, slow the Arctic meltdown, and build climate stability for future generations. Our report, Alaska's Renewable Energy Future, New Jobs, Affordable Energy, showcases specific renewable energy technologies that are ripe for development. And it also examines the potential for renewable energy jobs and recommends strategies that we can undertake to support this transition. Our study found that Alaska has the potential to create more than 100,000 renewable energy jobs across the state in the coming decades, more than replacing the fossil fuel jobs lost as those fuels become obsolete. We estimate that by 2050, the transition to a 100% clean renewable energy future for Alaska would generate a net increase of more than 67,000 jobs when we net out the fossil fuel jobs lost from the renewable jobs gained. Our research examined a sample of independent studies for Alaska assessing renewable potential and infrastructure and adjusted those assumptions for Alaska conditions. And I'd like to recognize Mark Foster, one of the collaborators on this report who prepared the job estimates. He's with us and he'll be available to answer any questions about that later in our Q&A section. The study also highlights that we can make the high cost of energy more affordable for Alaskans through investments in renewable projects and energy infrastructure. Renewable energy technology costs continue to decline, while fossil fuel costs, as we can see, are rapidly escalating and continuing to be quite volatile. The local fossil fuel costs in Alaska are quite high now, 2.5 times higher in the rail belt, and as much as 4 times higher in rural areas when we compare it to the national average. And as fossil fuel costs continue to escalate, renewable energy technologies look ever more attractive. Renewable energy technologies, including wind, solar, geothermal, ocean, and river hydrokinetic, and complementary energy storage technologies are continuing to decline in cost. And that's what makes renewables increasingly attractive as a primary source to substitute in the electric sector and to support the electrification of buildings and transportation and production of renewable hydrogen-based fuels. Worsening climate impacts throughout Alaska and globally make this transition to renewables urgent and ultimately inevitable as the world moves away from fossil fuels. A rapid transition to renewables is fundamental if we are to forestall the worst effects of an impending and intensifying climate catastrophe. The latest IPCC report, put out recently by a UN-sponsored group of hundreds of scientists from all over the world, makes it clear that climate change is already on track to significantly degrade life on Earth. It says we can expect massive dislocation, hunger, disease, political instability, but many of these risks can still be lessened or prevented with prompt action. The international movement away from climate damaging fossil fuels is driving transformative changes that are presenting new opportunities for Alaska's economy. Energy independence is certainly one of the important elements, and the interlocking crises now of the war in Ukraine and runaway climate warming have converged to make it even more urgent than ever to accelerate the transition to clean renewable energy. Continuing reliance on fossil fuels just prolongs volatility and global insecurity of our supply and that of our allies. And by rapidly transitioning to renewables, we will stop empowering dictators like Putin and all the havoc they've wreaked on our world. So it's clear that accelerating the transition to renewable energy is the most effective way to get true energy independence and security. I'm just going to quickly highlight a few other points from our report. Alaska is well positioned to be part of the new energy economy because we have a vast endowment of renewable energy resources. The scale of it is huge. The scale of Alaska's undeveloped renewable energy resource endowment is more than 14 times the total US energy consumption. And one of the promising opportunities for renewable developments on the horizon is green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is rapidly developing around the world, and with continued federal support, renewable hydrogen-based fuels have the potential to replace fossil fuels in the marine and aviation sectors and form the basis of a new export economy. The possibility of using Alaska's abundant excess renewable energy, and that's excess to what we need for our in-state uses, to make clean green fuels that are needed and in demand globally is an emerging opportunity that Alaska is well positioned to pursue. The Aleutian Islands is one of the places with abundant renewable potential and favorable market conditions because it's on an international shipping route that's being looked at. Another potential opportunity could be supplying clean fuel for the Anchorage International Airport, one of the world's largest cargo hubs, as the aviation industry transitions to no carbon green hydrogen-based fuels. And this map just shows how we would transport turning our renewables here in Alaska into reaching those markets where hydrogen fuels are in demand in the Far East. In our report, we identified a number of key strategies that the state could take to support this transition and gain these benefits. Today, we don't have time to go into a lot of detail about all these strategies, but I do urge you to take a look at our report at aknexteconomy.com. Just to hit a few of the high points, we recommend setting an aspirational goal of getting to 100% renewables in all sectors of our economy, production and use by 2050, undertaking a statewide comprehensive planning effort and extending the Alaska Renewable Energy Fund beyond its sunset next year and funding it with $3.2 billion in clean renewable energy seed capital. So that's a quick overview of some of the things we've been working on in the Regenerative Economies Working Group. And I'll now hand things back to Ruth.
Thank you so much, Kay. Super exciting report, which is of course only the first seed. We have much more to build together and many more things to consider. And we're going to hurry on to introduce a number of our exceptional panelists who are going to share with us today, speaking on accelerating the renewable energy conversion. Firstly, I'm excited to introduce Piper Foster Wilder, who's the founder, chief executive officer of 60 Hertz, a computerized maintenance management software for microgrids, from villages to remote industrial sites like mines, telecom, or fleets of backup power units. Her software enables assets that the people who maintain them to reach their full potential.
Hello, all. Wonderful to join with you today. And the number I just can't get out of my head is the 67,000 net job creation that Kay Brown just mentioned. That really maps to what 60 Hertz has been focused on from the beginning, which is how we can use software as a skill builder to upskill and encourage new employees to do their very best at maintaining our remote renewable assets, as well as the fossil backups that may be necessary. Just last year, 60 Hertz saw 91,000 maintenance records filed on our platform. And we believe that this is really the heart of true sustainability, that to upkeep our assets is the essence of ensuring that we achieve the greenhouse gas goals that we're going for. A lot is said about installation jobs for new renewable energy. However, we believe that renewable service jobs are just as important. I'd like to flag and nod to my business partner and co-founder, Tanya James, who is also on the webinar and would be able to answer one-on-one questions in the chat if people would like to engage. I think when we look at the skills necessary to make this technology transition happen, it has started with really practical know-how of troubleshooting, of upkeep, and following a classic preventative maintenance routine. This lends itself easily to wind, solar, battery energy storage systems, of course, EV charging stations. And we see that this kind of skill building and technology assisted job creation and maintenance is really common sense, not radical at all. 60 Hertz is a woman-owned small business. We have an all-female founding team, a number of female employees. However, we're also conscious that the energy transition globally is on track to be disproportionately tilted toward male employees. And so we're here offering another voice saying that having many women employed in energy asset maintenance is a tremendous opportunity. Statistically, 800,000 new jobs will be created in emerging markets alone, let alone globally, and that 70% of those jobs would be held by males. So let's see if we can't work together to get that back toward a 50-50 balance. And finally, I'll just say using technology assists like what 60 Hertz is offering is a tremendous way to help someone new to the market feel confident in their skills, to help promote, especially in a region like Alaska, the concept of telemaintenance, like telemedicine, but telemaintenance, which would vest more opportunity, authority, learning in the hands of people, ultimately in the last mile of maintenance. So again, just really delighted to hear the results of this report. Ruth, your warm introduction, and thanks for giving 60 Hertz a chance to lend our perspective too.
We are so happy to have you here with us. Piper, thank you for sharing that bit. And again, as she said, please direct your questions in the chat and hopefully we'll be able to answer them there. We're going to move quickly to Isaac Vanderburg. Isaac is the CEO of Launch Alaska. And in his first 6 years at Launch, Isaac led the organization to more than 10 times the growth in their annual operating budget and grew their portfolio to more than 30 high-growth climate tech startups. Isaac has managed 2 early-stage investment funds and in late 2021 was a founding board member of Earthshot Ventures, a $65 million climate tech VC fund, the first fund of its kind in Alaska.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you to everyone involved for hosting this important conversation. The number that also stuck with me was this 100% by 2050. And while that seems like a stretch goal, I actually think most of the technologies and business models that we need to get there are already in hand today. It's not a matter of creating things that we don't have. It's a matter of deploying the things that we already do have. And I think that's really hopeful. At Launch Alaska, we also think that Alaska has an incredible role to play as a world-class proving ground and deployment ground for many of those technologies that we're going to need tomorrow. So, the things we need to get going today we have, but there are also a few technologies that as we get to the 2030s and 2040s, we're going to need to have in hand to get to that last stretch to 100%. And Alaska has a massive role to play. And I think if you look at some of the work that's being done by folks like Piper and also many of our 31 portfolio companies, you can see the incredible role that Alaska has to play. And I think that's a really exciting thing. And also, I think we're already moving very quickly. I don't know if many of you noticed, maybe went quietly under the radar, but there was just a PPA, or rather an IPPA, which is an interconnection and power purchase agreement that was just approved in the last couple of weeks by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska for a 6 megawatt solar and storage facility. So that's a huge kind of precedent setting item that just happens. That means that, some of that utility scale solar and storage is going to start getting built here in a hurry in Alaska. And these things are already happening. I mentioned before the technologies that are already ready to go. And I think when we think about getting to that 100% by 2050, we oftentimes think just about, the generation, so solar and wind, and I'm really excited about hydrogen also. And we think about storage, but I also think there's a whole host of other technologies that can be brought to bear that we often don't think about that suggest a huge economic role for Alaska. Things like, giving a shout out to Piper with 60 Hertz, her technology, but also all sorts of technologies across transportation and energy and industrial processes. And also, as the report pointed out, there's interesting innovations for business models and financing. And that's an area that I'm really keen to continue developing in Alaska. I think finding creative ways to finance the kind of deployment at scale that we need is a really exciting opportunity for the state. And I'm excited to continue working with folks on this call and others in Alaska to find ways to deploy the technologies at scale that we need to deploy. So thanks again for having me, and I look forward to further conversation.
Thank you so much, Isaac. It's true that we are moving really quickly, but I'm hoping that we'll have more time for engagement. And I'll also, of course, have some comments to make. But first, we have to hear from all these experts who have given us a gift of their time. So next, we will hear from Duff Mitchell, the managing director of Juneau Hydro. Their description reads that Juneau Hydro has over 25 years of experience analyzing, developing, and building businesses from varied industries in Southeast Alaska, including seafood, timber, telecommunications, mining services, and hydropower. Duff has worked on innovations in many business sectors, having developed, patented, and trademarked value-added salmon products, and spent his work career creating jobs, improving the economic future for Alaskans while striving for the right environmental balance.
Ruth, thank you for that introduction. I'm Duff Mitchell. I'm the managing director of Juneau Hydropower and Juneau District Heating. I'm Klush Khan of the Tlingit, Tikwadi out of Angoon, and I'm calling in from the Aucklands. Juneau Hydropower is a 19.8 megawatt hydro facility that is fish friendly, harmonizes with nature. We have taken a unique and a holistic approach toward our hydro development. As many of you know, hydro could be a four-letter word with some groups. And I want to share that as the beavers work with nature to create hydro and work with the fish, that is the approach that we have taken. And I'm proud to say that as we develop our project, it's not only fish friendly, but it's fish enhancing. And I think that is the goal when you're in renewable energy, of not only your impact, but how do you create the benefit and the harmonization with nature. Moving to Juneau District Heating, we are developing a seawater heat pump system that would take and scavenge heat out of the Gasnaw Channel, which is right outside of Juneau, percolate that up to about 185 degrees and put that through a district heating system through and into all the downtown of Juneau. Juneau is 86% of its building load on diesel. And so not only are we taking hydropower and then fueling heat pumps using seawater heat, but then we're displacing additional diesel for heating. And this is where we see going to the 100% goal of sustainability and removing complete fossil fuels from the equation, not only for generation of your electricity, but also for displacing fossil fuels in heating and transportation. Going on to the report, I feel that some of the key takeaways is that it's asking for a transfer from aspiration to action, from we should think about to we shall do. And another takeaway is, we are blessed with the natural resources, the renewable energy resources that are the envy of the world, envy of other places. And I would just beg the thought, for whom much is given, much is required. And so I want to just turn around and invigorate all of us that there is much to do. and we have that personal responsibility to take forward and to create a more sustainable Alaska, and actually be a shining example of what could be done in other places in the world from the activities and actions we take forward here. In the report, it really talked about green and sustainability green. And I think there's a lot of people on the conversation today respect that and understand how we need to harmonize with nature and how we need to make a sustainable planet. But the report also talks about the economic green, and that attracts the people that may not be so enamored with those other more sustainability issues and where you hit in the pocketbook. Renewables can drive prices down. Renewables can create jobs. Renewables can displace fossil fuel. And I would also say displace the fossil fuel volatility. As we've all seen, and this ties into the energy independence and energy security, not only for our peoples, but for our nation, is that if you move to renewables, you decrease our dependency on fossil fuels, but you also flatline your energy costs so that you're not going up and down with the volatility. If you're in a rural school district in Alaska and oil shoots up to $150 a barrel, you know what the exponential effect is on your school budget. And so by moving slowly and working on to renewable energies, we can flatline that. So this report is very profound in pointing out the directions where we need to go. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Great. I was on mute. I said Gunalchish to Chinen. Duff, thank you for sharing with us. Next, we'll hear about workforce training from Charlie Scantlebury, who's a journeyman electrician with IBEW. He holds the certification of photovoltaic associate through the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. Charlie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Charles Scantlebury. I work with the IBEW 1547, and I'm really excited to be here. As a member of the IBEW and a product of the apprenticeship program that we offer, it's very important for us to be at the forefront of workforce development, as well as just to share in the urgency that everybody here has for the importance of renewable industries, especially in rural Alaska. A couple of the things that our apprenticeship program is doing at the moment is we have an EVITP program, which stands for Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program. It's a brand new curriculum, and it's actually in the process of going through its first fifth-year wireman class as that first class to be certified in electric vehicle chargers, the basic knowledge, background, and history, as well as applicable information that would be useful for employers they work for in the future, and also customers that they are trying to sell and also troubleshoot a lot of their products that they're going to be installing in their homes and in their businesses. Another program that we have, and the certification that was mentioned, the NABCEP, it's a growing nationally recognized certification for installation. They also have certifications for things like the contractor aspect of it, and like just being a supplier. It offers a vast amount of knowledge, and there's a huge network of people that are becoming certified, and it's becoming widely accepted around the nation. The NABCEP particularly deals with photovoltaics, which is solar. There's also as well. Both industries are having an increased demand here in Alaska, but what we lack is a sufficient amount of workforce, and that's where the IBEW is stepping in. We're encouraging and increasing the training that we offer our apprentices, while also reaching out to journeymen that are out in the field with update classes whenever the license cycle comes close to being renewed, we're starting to add a lot of renewable energy topics into those lessons as well. But yeah, I'll stick around so I can answer some questions a little bit later. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Charles. Happy to hear from you. We're going to keep the ball rolling now, turning towards community-based solar and the Solarized Kenai program. Ben Butker is going to share with us, who is ACPERG's Energy Outreach Specialist. Ben is a journalist in Alaska. He reported on local government, energy, environmental issues in the Cook Inlet oil and gas industry for Central Kenai Peninsula's regional daily, the Peninsula Clarion. Now as ACPERG's Energy Outreach Specialist, he supports Alaskans seeking to boost democratic control over their energy systems through engagement with the Railbelt electric co-ops. Having grown up on the traditional land of the Miami and Shawnee, he now works on the Dena'ina land of the Kenai Peninsula. He is one of the collaborators on the Renewable Energy Report. And I'll pass it over to you, Ben.
Thank you. So discussing community solar, one thing that's important to keep in mind is how rapidly it's grown. I remember in 2018, the Homer Electric Association was considering building a solar farm that was just under a megawatt, which would have been the biggest solar farm in the state at the time. They ultimately didn't end up doing that because of board disagreement, but it turned out not to matter much because, as you just heard Isaac mention, we're now there are now 6 megawatt farms, solar farms being underway in the state, and on the Kenai Peninsula in particular, that 1 megawatt farm, although it didn't end up being built, our community solar project, Solarize the Kenai, ended up installing close to that amount of solar in 2 years. Solarize the Kenai was a community a cooperative buying program for solar. You might be familiar with Solarize Fairbanks and Solarize Anchorage as well. It was inspired by that effort, and we installed about 800 megawatts, or I'm sorry, 800 kilowatts, almost a megawatt of distributed solar. That's home solar systems in the 2 years that we were operating. And since we're talking about jobs, I spoke with Stephen Trimble of the Alaska Solar Energy Industry Association about a year ago. And at the time, he told me that the Alaskan solar industry was worth about 25 million and was growing at a rate of about 200% annually. So that was a year ago. So that number is probably, as you might guess, a bit out of date now. But that was the revenue it was generating. And most of these growing solar businesses in Alaska were reinvesting that revenue in growth. And there's a good ratio in the solar industry of growth to employment. The Nationwide Solar Trade Group, the Solar Energy Industry Association, estimates there are about 7.2 full-time jobs created for every million invested in solar, which is the third highest ratio of investment and employment to employment in the U.S., according to the Solar Energy Industry Association. And in part, that's because of the way solar installation is done by teams of 2 to 3 people, and adding an additional person to the team doesn't really let them work faster. You just get an extra person in the way, so they tend to, as solar installers get more jobs, they hire more teams, so that leads to greater employment there. And so that's the full-time solar installation jobs, which are mostly carpentry jobs. There are also subcontracted electricians. Most solar installers contract their electrical work because it's not very efficient for them to maintain a full-time electrician's license. And so that's some additional employment. So small home solar systems maintain their potential to reach. They have the potential to reach this this potential of renewable jobs that we've been talking about. So thank you.
Really, I just unmuted myself. Our last expert speaker who is going to share with us today is Chandler Kemp. Ben, we're so grateful for your contributions, and I'm hoping that we can revisit all of our speakers' contents and offerings in the question and answer section. But now to move to energy transition in Alaska's fishing industry. Chandler Kemp is the founder of Kempe Energetics. Chandler has worked with the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and other partners since 2016 to understand how energy is used in the fishing industry, what opportunities exist to reduce emissions, and evaluate the potential for new technologies to enable an energy transition. He founded Kempe Energetics in 2015 with a mission to improve energy systems in Alaska and beyond, and has conducted over 100 energy audits on commercial buildings, residential buildings, and fishing vessels in Alaska and the Yukon. What is that, Chandler?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so like Ruth said, I've been measuring how fishing vessels use energy for about 5 years now with the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. I'm living on Aquan land in Juneau, and I really enjoy working with the fishing fleet for a couple of reasons. The first is growing up in Haines and in general in small towns in coastal Alaska. I find fishing to be such an important part of communities, not only as an economic driver, but also as a part of the culture in these communities. And so it's really meaningful for me to be able to work in that space. And then the second reason I find it really exciting is that fishermen, since they're relying on a harvest of a wild resource, they're really exposed to the impacts of climate change very directly and already experiencing increased volatility and catch due to warm ocean events like the blob that will occur more frequently as the climate continues to warm. And as a result, there are many fishermen who are highly motivated to reduce their own carbon emissions, and they've been really valuable partners in the work that I've done. As we're thinking about what an energy transition might look like in the fishing industry, it's important to remember how diverse the fleet is in Alaska. We have everything from like a 32-foot gill netter in Bristol Bay to a 120-foot trawler that might transit hundreds of miles to the fishing grounds in the Bering Sea. And so the types of technologies, as well as human experience or expertise that's needed to support an energy transition across the fleet is equally diverse. And so with the Longline Fishermen's Association, we're working on a few different fronts simultaneously right now. One of those fronts is looking at hybrid propulsion systems. So the concept there is, in many fisheries, boats need a lot of power so they can transit to the fishing grounds quickly, but then spend very long days operating with very small loads on the engine. And so in those cases, it can be effective to have a battery system so that the boat can turn off their engines while they're fishing, and then only use the engines while they're in transit. In other fisheries where the boats might be bigger or the loads might be larger, hybrid propulsion systems aren't nearly as effective. And so in those cases, we're looking at alternative renewable fuels that the fishing fleet might be able to use. So specifically, right now we're working with, we have a partnership with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory as well as Sandia National Lab. And so the labs are working with us to identify the best next steps or the best path toward a zero carbon fishing fleet. And that includes developing funding to establish a pilot hybrid propulsion system boat, as well as investigating the potential for renewable fuels in rural communities in Alaska. So it's a really exciting time to work in this space, and we're hopeful to have a pilot project off the ground in the next year or so, and are eager to give fishermen the opportunity to, or empower fishermen to take control of their own emissions and find ways to create carbon neutral operations for themselves. I'll pass it back to Ruth.
Okay, I'm sure I'm unmuted this time. Thank you so much, Chandler, for sharing with us. All right, team. So I want to hold deep gratitude for all of these industry leaders who have gifted their time to share with us today. It is so eye-opening and exciting to learn from each of you, and I know that we'll continue to do so because this is only, a drop in the bucket, the first seed we're planting. Of course, however, I personally got to name the elephant in the Zoom room. It is so important that we also work to diversify this industry. And there are many folks who are perhaps more behind the scenes and who are therefore under-recognized for the important work that they are doing. However, as we think about who is positioned to successfully do this work, that also means that we need to interrogate how this work is being done. So for this work to be additionally, sustainable and just, that means it also must be anti-racist. That includes respecting the legal and inherent sovereignty of Indigenous peoples and recognizing the cultural and spiritual bond and codependency that they have with the land and non-human relatives. All development is still development on Indigenous lands. In all development, including renewable development, we must consider the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples and their sovereign right to self-determination. These new exciting industries will fail to contribute to healing the harms of extractive greenhouse gas emitting development if they too sacrifice frontline communities. But instead, we now have the opportunity to repair this relationship and build forward together, honoring the ancestral wisdom of Indigenous peoples, prioritizing their access to land and subsistence harvest, and incorporating tribal leadership into private sector endeavors. We are bridging communities here, communities that have lived in good relationship with lands for millennia, and this community who is dedicated to serving our modern energy needs in a sustainable and just way. These things can be achieved and easily integrated together. Two folks that we are especially inspired by and whose leadership we are deeply grateful for, but who unfortunately could not join us are, firstly, Edwin Byfeld, who is the founder of Native Renewables, an Indigenous-owned and community-based company focused on solar and wind installations in rural Alaska. They hired locals and completed the largest rural solar installation this November in Kotzebue, which will generate 700,000 plus kilowatt hours of electricity a year, saving over 50,000 gallons of diesel fuel per year, the equivalent of approximately $100,000 per year. With the new solar project, Kotzebue will be roughly 30% powered by renewable energy. And secondly, Alexandra Salmon, who is the Igiagig Village Council president, who, among many things, helped bring a 35 kilowatt river hydrokinetic power system to her community of Igiagig. To date, the installation has not negatively impacted salmon and is able to provide more than half of the village's peak electricity need. They are in the process of installing a second 35 kilowatt RivGen device, along with smart microgrid electronics and energy storage, which altogether could reduce Igiagig village diesel by 90%. So in the chat, I know that we are dropping some links to learn more about these Indigenous stewards of such incredible renewable projects. And I am excited to continue this conversation together. I'm going to pass it off to Kay to briefly outline some specific actions that we can all take to better build community.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you for those comments. It's been a great pleasure and honor to work with your organization, Native Movement, and with the Just Transition Collective as we think forward about the possibilities of our future. And I just want to highlight a few calls to action of specific things that we can do now to accelerate and advance the renewable transition. You may be aware that the Congress has really bogged down over the president's Build Back Better legislation, and there is a large appropriation pending there that really needs to happen. So one thing we can do is encourage our congressional delegation to support and expedite approving the funds for the transition to renewable energy. And it sounds like from reports, this may be getting revived. And so it's a good time to weigh in and encourage that this actually happens. There's also a big role for our state legislature to play. We can encourage our legislators to extend the Alaska Renewable Energy Fund, which sunsets next year unless it's extended. House Bill 358 by Representative Edgmond would extend this fund for another 10 years. And that bill is in House Finance. There's also a companion bill by Senator Reback, Senate Bill 202 in Senate Finance. So we do have bipartisan support for this concept. That's very encouraging. And in addition to extending the fund, they should replenish it with a new round of seed funding that can be used to jumpstart these pending projects. We'd like to see $3.2 billion put in there. We think that is at the scale that's needed, but as the legislature debates what to do with this sudden surplus brought about by the oil price spike, we really want to encourage them to put some of those dollars into these long-term beneficial investments that will pay dividends for many, many generations to come if we can build our renewable energy infrastructure and get the benefits that we've been discussing today. There's also House Bill 177 that's worth mentioning that would clarify the governor's appropriation, or clarify the legislature's appropriation authority. House Bill 177 would keep the governor without legislative approval from unilaterally spending large amounts of federal dollars that roll in if it happens to be when the legislature is not in session. And the reason for this legislation is when we got those COVID relief funds, Governor Dunleavy took some unauthorized and apparently illegal actions to spend those monies. And the legislature is supposed to be in charge of appropriations. And this will clarify that and be sure that we have public input and transparency when these new funds get allocated. So that bill right now is expected to come up on the House floor in sometime in the near future, and Rep. Tuck is the sponsor, and he says messages to House members would be helpful. We also have some bills that deal with the renewable portfolio standard introduced by Governor Dunleavy. Unfortunately, those need some work before they are passed, but they would set a renewable standard for our rail belt region to require the utilities to generate a specific amount of their energy or their electricity from renewables, getting to 80% by 2040. So this is a good concept and we need to get this done, but this bill needs to be amended to tighten up what is considered to be renewable. Another way to get involved is to participate in your local utility board, and such things as showing up for meetings, engaging with the members of the board, advocating for renewables, and importantly, participating in elections, utility board elections. And there are a number of activists that work in this arena up and down the rail belt who I'm sure would love to connect with you if you have an interest and help facilitate engagement at that level. I also want to mention another opportunity is to participate or apply to participate in Alaska's Just Transition Summit, which is going to be hosted by the Alaska Just Transition Collective. The deadline to apply is April 8th, and the meeting is going to be happening May 20 through 22. And I hope Carly can, or Margie can drop that in the chat. Finally, we hope you will stay in touch and continue this conversation with us as we go forward. We're building this loose coalition, AK Next Economy, and we will be continuing to host conversations about various aspects of this. We've got a survey we put in the chat, so especially if you're not already connected to us, we'd encourage you to fill that out. Let us know what your interests are, and so we can stay connected in the future as we go forward. And I think that's all. I'll turn it back to Ruth.
Awesome. Chin and Kay, I'm about to hand it right back to you as we move into our question and answer section. We invited folks at the beginning to particularly drop some questions to Carly Weir, who was going to support Kay in moderating the questions. But if you'd like to drop them directly in the chat, we really invite that. We have such incredible experts spending their time with us today. So please share your questions in the chat, and this is the opportunity to have them answered. And although Piper had to hop off, Tanya, the co-founder of 60 Hertz, is also with us. So Tanya, if there are any questions, I suppose I might direct them to you.
So I understand one question has come in for Chandler. Can we use fish oil for biofuels?
Oh yeah, so that's an interesting question. There's been some work in that direction. About 10 years ago, I think there was a project in Alaska where fish oil was refined to use, I believe, as a heating oil, but may have used it in some of the land-based diesel generators as well. So it is possible. There are some challenges with, I think, the shelf life of that type of biofuel, but that is can be improved or affected by the process that you're using to refine the fish oil into biofuel. So I think the answer is there is potential there, and it's something that we are looking into, but there's not a off-the-shelf solution that we can plug and play in a community.
Thank you. So do we have other questions from the audience anyone would like to ask? I wanted to also note that we've been reaching out to state leaders to share this report with them. I want to acknowledge and thank Les Guerra for coming. I know he's put himself forward to run for one of the major offices in our state, and we do need to cultivate our leaders. And so thank you, Les, for your interest in this topic. And we hope that others will follow your lead and that we will start the shift in the public conversation so that we will be able to get these necessary actions accomplished. And I see Colleen has a hand up.
Yeah, hi. I'm Colleen Fisk. I have one quick question, then a longer question. Quick question is that 6 megawatt solar, is that the one in Houston and MEA territory that was approved? And someone throw it in the chat or whatever. And then my longer question, of course, I'm always asking about education. If unfortunately, I have not read the report yet, and I'm curious if there is a component around education for K through 12, not just the very important workforce development work, which Charlie addressed. I'm very excited to hear about, but also for the younger ages, which of course is a lot of the work that I do.
And the answer is yes, that is discussed briefly in the report. And I don't know if any of the other co-authors want to further elaborate on Ben or Carly on those elements.
It looks like Isaac may have some answers to that question. If we could unmute Isaac.
Oh, there we go. Hi, just answering Colleen's first question, which is that is, I believe, the 6 megawatt development in Houston, Alaska, just in case folks are not familiar with Houston in the Valley. But yes, Houston, Alaska is where that development is. And I don't have the answer for your second question. I'll defer to my fellow panelists for that one.
Great. Thank you, Isaac. We have a question from Kai. Curious about hydrogen, blue, green opportunities, production, export, as well as use in Alaska. I think let's refer that to Mark Foster to comment if you're willing, Mark.
Yes, thank you. The short answer is there are a number of opportunities for hydrogen in Alaska. The report that we put together was primarily focused on the 2050 time horizon and the potential for green hydrogen. That is hydrogen produced from renewable energy resources like wind, solar, geothermal. In that time frame, we do think essentially the cost of the technology to produce the hydrogen fuels, whether it's hydrogen or ammonia, et cetera, will become competitive and potentially even be a fuel for aviation at the Anchorage Airport, the cargo hub. But it's definitely out on the horizon. It's not in the immediate future for the green hydrogen.
Thank you. Let's see, I see a question here in the chat. Is there any continuing discussion of expanding the Fire Island wind farm? This is from Les. Obviously, I'm interested in statewide renewables, and Alexander Salmon and others in IGIAC have the role models on this subject. Anyone on the call able to address the Fire Island wind farm?
I'm going to go ahead and change the security settings so folks can unmute themselves. I think that should have done the trick if anyone wants to answer that.
So we're not.
So, hi, this is Isaac. I wouldn't speak to specific conversations. I think something that the report referenced and that our friends over at REAP are working on is this RPS Renewable Portfolio Standard. That is a bill that the governor introduced recently into the legislature, which would set targets for the state and mandatory targets for the state to source a portion of their energy from renewables. And I think if that gets pushed through, which it sounds like it won't go through this session, but we're still hoping that it will next session. If and when that gets done, that's going to provide an immense kind of both carrot and stick for utilities across the state to source as much renewable generation as possible. And I think at that point, you'll be looking at utilities who will be asking for things like that to be expanded and new renewable generation because they're also looking for the renewable energy credits, the RECs off of those facilities. So I just wanted to highlight what a immensely important bill and the great work that REAP is doing to get that RPS passed. It's makes all this stuff happen a lot quicker. So
Great, thank you, Isaac. Let's go to Angie. You have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Kay, and everyone for organizing this meeting. I have a quick question regarding the renewable portfolio standard. I'm just concerned if that would decrease the floor price for rural communities for their power cost equalization. And another larger question is, how is, I guess two things, how are utilizing waste products considered, are waste products considered as energy source in this report? And how, I also really want to go along with Colleen on education and workforce development. I'm currently calling communities with wood boilers and just realizing that every community, almost every community needs training just to run a wood boiler. And it's, yeah, so, but there is no state effort. There's no trainer even for solar projects in the state, but my professor Eric Goddard is putting a train the trainer for solar projects. But even just running a wood boiler, rural communities are having problem running them. So how can we ensure that workforce development for just the simple technology as wood boiler, or even we're finding that they have been installed wrong. So the blame kind of goes to the operators when things are not installed correctly. So I'm just wondering, these behind the scene challenges, are they considered as part of the report? I know this is a starting initiative, but I just want these to be considered really well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angie. That's quite a few questions packed in there. I'm going to see whether any of the panelists or speakers can respond to any of your questions about PCE or waste products or education. Mark?
I do think the question raised about the PCE floor in the rail belt is a really good one. If you look carefully, you'll see that the PCE floor in the rail belt has been raising quite rapidly due to the escalation in natural fuel of the natural gas costs and is likely to continue to do so. So essentially, the conclusions that we came to were on the current trajectory, renewable energy would trim the price escalation that we're seeing in the rail belt and essentially keep that gap from narrowing more rapidly than it already is.
Hey, I'd just like to answer Angie on one thing. I don't have the answer, but using waste heat or waste of any kind falls back to the full utilization of the resources. And if you're using that supply chain where one man's trash is another man's treasure, so to say, in utilizing that waste product, that's something in Alaska to consider with whether we're using fish waste or wood waste or other kind of wasted heat resources from data centers, so to say, in the conjunction with the RPS. But I don't have the answer of whether that's incorporated in the legislation as proposed or not.
Thank you, Duff. I just took the intro to biomass class, and it's amazing that Anchorage is producing 7 megawatts of electricity from their landfill. That's higher than what the Fire Island wind farm produces on a normal day. And, yet I'm going to look into how much we're spending, how much diesel we're burning to make waste for our wastewater, which is also an energy source. So we have all these energy sources and we spend money to manage these wastes. It costs us a lot to manage the landfill, especially water treatment is a big cost in rural communities. So if these can be looped back to be utilized as energy source, that would be really, I think that's like the biggest and easiest resource to tackle with. It also reduces our cost of managing waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Jody Mitchell.
Hi, I first of all want to thank you all for inviting me to listen in. I haven't read the report yet, but I definitely grabbed the link so I can look at it after this meeting. I'm hoping that there's support for small salmon-friendly hydro projects in there for our rural communities. I think the only other option we have, I work for IPEC. I'm the CEO of IPEC. We serve the communities of Rangoon, Hoonah, Cape, Cluckwan, and the Chilkat Valley in rural Southeast in the rainforest. The best option for us, sorry about my dog, is small salmon-friendly hydro. The only other option we have for baseload power is diesel. We've looked at wind. We don't have steady enough wind. The only place that we found that was near Cape that was possibly going to be good enough really wasn't, because you need pretty much a steady 9 knots. It was 8 miles from the community. Well, a transmission line for 8 miles is more than the cost of the project, and it definitely just makes it economically infeasible. And then solar, solar is probably a good option for us, but again, it's not base load power. And we all know that it gets dark. Half of the year is pretty dark and the other half is very light. So we have identified 2 projects that will displace, hundreds of thousands of gallons over their lifetimes. And the 2 projects that we have built, there's actually more salmon in the stream now than there was before we built them. One of them is in Hoonah, Gartina Falls, and the other is in Cake at Gunnet Creek, where there's actually a fish hatchery. We got a nice letter from NSRA, the hatchery owners that there is actually more fish this year than there ever has been, now that they have clean, fresh water coming from a pipe that we have directed water to them. Before that, it was always silty and dirty, and so they struggled. Anyway, unfortunately, there is not funding for these last two projects. The one for Angoon, the Thayer Creek project, is estimated we need about $20 million. But that would be a 100% solution for Angoon. They would only have to have diesel when there's maintenance going on, or for whatever reason the project goes down. And there would be plenty of excess capacity. We even talked about possibly, I know the Alaska Marine Highway has been talking about doing an electric ferry that maybe we could charge, through a trickle charge, charge a battery for them, that they could come into Angoon and swap out whenever they come by or they need to, using our excess capacity there. And then the project in Hoonah, anybody who's been to Hoonah knows that it's a growing community. It would bring times when we can actually turn the diesels off in Hoonah, which is so much of a gold standard for us. Once we get these last two projects done, we believe that we won't be back at the Renewable Energy Fund trough, so to speak, because I think there's been a lot of criticism about how much funding Southeast got for their hydro projects, and namely IPEC was a beneficiary. But now they've limited the amount per project to $2 million. There's no way you can build a hydro project with 2 million, probably not even a wind project. So I'm hoping that that changes. I'm trying to think of what else I wanted to say, but I'm all for renewable portfolio standards as long as funding is provided to get there, because if it isn't, rates are going to go up. Because if you have to borrow money for these projects, you're taking away from the savings. And if you borrow too much, you actually end up with higher rates than you did in the beginning, which is just completely unacceptable when your rates are already 60 to 70 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on what fuel prices are. And in my entire time at IPEC, I've been there since 1993. I've never seen fuel prices this high, never. Prior to this, the highest I saw was about $4.20 or $4.25 a gallon. Well, most recently, we are now paying $4.89 per gallon in Hoonah. And we have a special deal with the fuel providers. We negotiate that to try to get the best price we can. I don't know what that is retail, but for us, that is, it's scary, because our rates are definitely going to have to go up in order to cover those costs. We are a nonprofit. We are extremely small. We only have 1,400 member owners, and we only have 11 full-time employees to try to keep our costs down as low as possible. Anyway, we do a lot with very little, and I would just appreciate your guys' support in helping us get those last two projects and to get more money into the Renewable Energy Fund so that we can get this done once and for all. And anyway, I know that we're all on the same page with many things, but I do know that hydro can sometimes be controversial. But I assure you, in the rainforests of Southeast Alaska, there's a lot of people who depend on the salmon fisheries. And even before we can build a project, we have to get a Title 16 permit from the Department of Fish and Game. And they've actually encouraged us, because they said they know that these projects can actually enhance salmon habitat. So anyway, I don't want to keep going on and on, but I just wanted to make sure that I made my comments. Goodness, sheesh. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jody. That was enlightening to hear about your specific situation. And I think you point out the benefits that accrue to the communities where these public investments have been made in the past and where rates are more affordable. So I think we're on the same wavelength here. Alaskans struggle with high energy costs all over the state, and public investments will help this situation. And that's one thing we really need to get behind and support right now at this moment in time, when unexpectedly there's this extra money on hand and a big debate going on in Juneau about what to do with it. I think maybe we can take a couple more. Here's one sent to me. Are wireless transmission lines a possibility for Alaska? Anyone on the call tackle that? Wireless transmission lines.
I'm wondering if the individual who asked the question could give a little bit more info on what those are. I've never heard of them before. I'm curious what they are.
Hi, this is Joshua Nicely. So the idea is basically that instead of having miles and miles of lines that you have to string out and clear the forest around it, you can basically shoot lasers. They usually do it in the near infrared or even sometimes in the mid infrared wavelength. So it's something that's not going to affect human eyesight or anything like that. But the basic idea is instead of having to have a wire that transmits it, you just can shoot it with a laser.
I would say as someone who's working on transmission lines, it's extremely interesting. I have never heard of it. I've heard of inductive wireless for electric vehicle charging, where you actually drive over a charger and it can charge your batteries, but that would be an interesting development. And is this actually a proof of concept, or is this something that is being worked on? I mean, the first thing that jumps out to me is Tesla's wireless transmission of electricity, which, he invented the remote controls from air to wire. But anyways, any further on that would be an interesting development.
Pretty sure it's a proof of concept. They've been doing it down in New Zealand, testing it for I think about 2 years now. I haven't heard basically anything other than that they're testing it and it's been working well so far. And so it'd be great to learn more about that and see if maybe it's something that could work up here, because it seems like that would really reduce costs in terms of infrastructure.
It sounds like that would be huge, and an area we will look into. Well, I think that about brings us to the end of our questions, and so I'll turn it back to Ruth for our wrap up.
Thank you, Kay, and thank you all so much for being such engaged listeners. Chinan Khali, to our panelists, for sharing so much with us. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, who I consider myself very new in these conversations, to have such a breadth and depth of knowledge and experience on maintenance management software for microgrids, climate tech VC funds, utility initiatives, workforce training, energy transition for the fishing industry, small scale hydroelectric. It's really unbelievable what we can do when we come together and teach one another, learn together. And for all those reasons and more, of course, we really encourage you all to check out our report at aknexteconomy.com. Huge shout out to all of our co-hosts. And again, this has been live streamed on Facebook, and the recording will be available at the website for partners who were unable to be here with us today. I'd particularly invite folks to scroll back to Kay's great talk through of some action items of how we can be in better solidarity with one another's initiatives. There are a number of groups to follow and to join, as well as the application for the Alaska's Just Transition Summit coming this May to Anchorage. So we are so proud to be working with all of you, so honored to have spent this time together. And Chinan Khali, we hope you have a great rest of your day.